Good afternoon. I call to order the special called school board meeting on Tuesday, October 29th. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance led by Vice Chair Carol Cook and remain standing until the completion. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Mr. Hendrick, are there any amendments to the agenda?
There are no amendments, Madam Chair.
Board members, any amendments to the agenda? Seeing none, may I have a motion and a second to adopt the agenda?
Second.
Motion from Mrs. Kane and a second from Mrs. Long. Mrs. Hauk, are there any speakers to agenda items?
Yes, Madam Chair, we have one speaker,
Thank you. Please go ahead and call the speaker.
Daniel Amend.
Good afternoon, and by golly, I hope you have had a lot of calls because you don't have a lot of participants here. I just wanted to get two things. I know you guys are thinking of extending the school year. I'm urging you guys not to do that. I think there's enough in-service days and even days of the holidays, what we used to call Christmas and Easter, to buttress whatever instruction hours are required by the state. Although I don't care, I've been asked to advocate the waiving of the midterms, which I understand is also up for debate here, and if that is a fact, I think the kids have had a lot going on. That's not my default position normally, but hell, we didn't have internet until just a few days ago, so that's my 2 cents. Boy, I hope there's more people calling you than are showing up. So good luck, God bless, and y'all have a good week. Cheers.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is the consent agenda. May I have a motion and a second to approve?
Make a motion.
Motion by Mrs. Cook and a second by Mrs. Meyer. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes 7-0. On the non-consent agenda, item 6.1, request approval of the amended 2024-2025 instructional calendar. May I have a motion and a second to approve this item?
I make a motion.
A motion from Mrs. Long and a second from Mrs. Meyer. Mr. Hendrick, would you please introduce this item?
Yes, Madam Chair. As we discussed at the workshop last week, the idea of make-up time, make-up days for the days that we missed from the 2 hurricanes. And so there are 2 items forthcoming. This first one is strictly the school calendar and the days that would change on the school calendar that the board previously approved. And to discuss those changes is Chief Human Resource Officer, Ms. Paula Texel.
Yes. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, school board members, Mr. Hendrick, and staff. I am here this afternoon to present the recommendation to adjust the 2024-25 instructional calendar. The proposed adjusted calendar would include the following: utilizing one of the previously approved hurricane makeup days, January 6th, as a student day where school will be in session, to utilize the non-student day of February 17th, 2025 as a makeup day and school will be in session, and the last day of school, which is May 29th, 2025, would now be a full day of school and students would not be released 2 hours early. Additional adjustments that would be impacted by the recent school closures would include first semester exams in high school and middle school to be waived, allowing for increased instructional hours at those levels. High school graduations will be held at the end of May, again to allow for the greatest number of instructional hours. Additionally, I wanted to share with you that last Thursday I was able to meet with the calendar committee to brief them on the recommendation and to receive any input or questions. And they were very appreciative of the recommendations being made and are in full support of these recommendations. As a reminder, that group and that committee consists of teachers and administrators, district staff, parents, and community members. So we thank you for your consideration of this request.
Thank you. Board members, any discussion? Mrs. Cook?
Thank you. Some of the email that we received and a couple of phone calls alluded to us extending the school year. And if you look at the calendar that we approved in December, May 29th is the last day of school. We're extending the school year by 2 hours. And so I think people need to understand that very clearly. We're not asking them to come, weeks beyond. We could also ask them to come a few days beyond if we needed to. But the calendar committee and the superintendent and staff were able to look at how do we do this with the least amount of disruption. I think you did a fabulous job. I support this 100%. And when it comes to graduation and things like that, we'll find out, first of all, what the venue will be, and then we'll know what day the graduations will be. So I appreciate and need people to understand, we are not extending the school year, except by 2 hours. Okay, so thank you.
Thank you. I had a few items I wanted to raise, which we discussed a bit in the workshop last week. One is, it is, I know, very disappointing for teachers to lose that planning day. And really, a planning day is as valuable as multiple learning days, frankly, right? A teacher to be able to have that day, to be able to plan the learning, makes it that much more effective. So I would just like to ask, and as I did in the workshop, that we talk with principals, whatever it takes to try to get our teachers some time during that second semester to make up for that loss of planning day. I don't know how that works. I would ask you all as the professionals how that could possibly be worked in. I know it can't be a full day, but maybe it's a couple of hours on several different days. But I think that planning day is extraordinarily important, and acknowledging the work that happens with that time is important.
Yeah, I can comment on that, Madam Chair. You can't put more minutes in a day, right? And I can't put more days in a week. And so short of adding a Saturday to someone's calendar, we did pay employees for 9 days of not working. And one of those we paid for them to come to school and plan. And so we did give an additional planning day back. Our teacher contract outlines the rules for planning and what is and is not, and there's a lot protected, probably more than you realize in terms of during the day and after the day. And so I agree with you, and that's why we wanted to keep at least one of those planning days. But honestly, beyond that, there's also the business of having to run school and to have a faculty meeting and to keep people up to speed on communication. So I think our principals do a good job of that normally, and I think they'll understand the stress of that for the second semester. But I cannot find hours or days to do that other than the normal ways that principals do that. And some of them have creative ways to do that, using substitutes, team teaching, doing it during a field trip. There's lots of other ways that you can do that. And they do that now, but I don't want to put on record that, and here's the specific way, because that's just, you can't squeeze that into a calendar that doesn't have any flexibility at this point.
Right, I wouldn't ask you to do that, Mr. Hendrick, but I have heard about those creative ways over the years as I've visited schools, and so I guess maybe sharing some of those creative ways and encouraging that we find some of that time, if we can, using those creative ways in the second semester. I do lament the loss of district-wide training is also, I'm sure fellow board members have been to some of those sessions. They're extraordinary, both for the professional development that is gained during the actual training sessions and for the fraternity that is gained with being with one another. Again, I know we can't create a day. I know we can't create time. But just that professional development, and I know you do this, Ms. Texel, we encourage the PD, we encourage that professional development. So I just wanted to mention, ensuring that we're still going to encourage somehow to find that PD in the second semester.
If I comment on that too, if you don't mind, because we've just looked this up. We have professional development that goes on in this building every night and in schools across the district every night. So last year, Mrs. Woodford, I think it was $3.3 million we paid to teachers in stipends to attend training after hours. So that's an enormous amount of training that happens outside of those district-wide training days anyway, and you'll see that each and every night the rest of the school year. Well, maybe not the last night, but most nights.
I think, and I wanted to highlight what Mrs. Cook said about the graduation schedule. We're working on those venues, and we'll get that schedule out. We did a great job making up for lost days. I feel like the reducing the midterms, right, gains probably 4 days or so of instruction. That's a great deal of time and a great deal of instruction. And then also with the graduations really shifting from what would have been early mid-May to later May gains another 5-6 days of instruction. So we really are picking up those days of instruction, even it doesn't look like we're adding much. And so with that said, I would actually suggest that we consider allowing the last day of school to remain an early release day. I feel like if you look at the hours that were provided to us in the workshop, you know, the 900 required hours, and then where we are with the 9:30, 9:34, you know, the time itself, the 2 hours itself on that last day of school, I don't feel like is substantial instructional time that's going to be used to make up for learning loss from this first semester. I do think that right now it is tough. First semester is going to be tough. I mean, when you're talking fourth grade math standards, you know, I mean, every geometry, I'm watching 8th grade geometry from my kitchen table trying to make up those standards, right? So it is first semester, making up those days is tough. I think come May 29th, those 2 hours, our teachers, our families, our students are used to having that kind of celebratory early release. Do we want to, on the last day of school, say, oh, remember those hurricanes? That was awful. We're going to actually stay until the very end. But I don't mean to spring it on you, but I have just been noodling on it in my mind, and I wonder if anyone else would consider that idea. Mrs. Edmond?
Superintendent Hendrick, yes, we had the workshop, and there was information provided for the rationale of extending the day. Do you mind sharing the intention around extending the day?
Yeah, at the end of the day, you have to look at 900 hours, and we talked about what's enough? Is it 900 even? Is it 910? Is it 930? How do we plan for unexpected, other events? I won't mention the other name, but any other weather event or unknown event. And so you plan around that to make sure you have enough. We certainly discussed internally, are the last 2 hours of the school day on May 29th going to be academically? No, they're going to be exam time, just like the rest of that day in a secondary school, and in elementary it is what it is. So honestly, we could take or leave either one. We didn't want to send a message that, well, let's just do the minimum and figure that out. But we were also protecting against what happens if something else occurs. Mrs. Hine did share with me that she was going to bring this up. We're fine either way. It's not a make or break thing until we have to come back to you and say, oh, we missed another day, so where do we find that time? But we put forth a proposal that we thought captured enough and also did not interrupt families, teachers, to the point where we're asking people to come in on days that they otherwise would not have worked, which is what we tried to avoid, because that, from an HR perspective, becomes very problematic.
Thank you, Mr. Hendrick. And I just would like to co-sign your your thoughts about the half day, and some of the emails we received were exactly that. Some kids will be taking exam, elementary school would be different. So what would be the point of extending it to 2 additional hours? So I am in support of Mrs. Hine's recommendation.
Mrs. Meyer?
I certainly am. I'm open to the idea. And I know, Mr. Hendrick, you already touched on that, but to your point, my concern is, what if there is a need for another day that we have to take off? We're not, I hate to say it, but we're not through hurricane season yet. And so would we be kind of I don't know if we'd be prematurely, I just think it might be better if we keep that day, as you mentioned, as a full day, just as like an insurance policy in case we have to take another day. If the group wants to not do that, I understand. I think there's a reason why Mr. Hendrick and staff made that decision.
I think my thought on that is we'll cross that bridge, right? And then we have that time should we need it. So we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Mrs. Kane? Mrs. Long?
Yes. Mr. Hendrick, will you please clarify, the state gives the number of hours that we have to build back because of the hurricanes. And if we don't do it exactly as they say in the time frames, there's a huge financial requirement. I don't remember if it was us or one of the other counties where they had to pay $1 million back. It wasn't us years ago. Okay. This was a long time ago. And I don't want to see us in that predicament, because the state really, they're the boss, Florida Department of Education.
So
And I
there-
just don't want to
yeah.
get hit.
So we do, we get audited every year on the number of hours that we have and the schedule and the calendar, and if you don't meet those minimum number of hours, you do have to pay back a prorated portion of FTE. And there have been, even as recently as this year, some districts that have had to do that for things that happened 3 years ago. The piece that is not public yet is when our graduations, right? We're not finalized that schedule yet. We are almost there, and we hope to have that out in about a week. In that graduation schedule, there could be a school or two that graduate a day or two early because we're limited in venues. And so those 2 hours don't help there, right? But it does just continue to protect everything. Honestly, we can make it work either way, but if there's any hiccup along the way, we will have to come back to you with adding things. And at that point, our choices may not be the same as the choices we have today.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the recommendation from superintendent and staff. I have to say I agree with Mrs. Meyer that I feel that having that extra insurance policy, should anything else occur in the school year, we're well prepared for that. And I do think it's our responsibility to look ahead to the ifs, ands, and whats and make sure the decisions we're making are sound moving forward. And it really is all about balance. I think that what was proposed was about the best balance we could have hoped for. We really could have had students going to school through June. And I remember a time in Pinellas, we went well into June for our school year. So being able to only add those couple of hours is really undisruptive. It's very balanced for our employees, for our families. They're already planning to go to school that day. An additional 2 hours does not disrupt them. But if we have to come back later and say, we need to add another 3 days of school, or we need to add an additional day to the school calendar that you previously didn't plan on, it's going to be disruptive for them to try to find childcare, to try to cover rides or whatever it is that each family is going to need. So in thinking ahead to all of the possibilities that might be before us, I do have to agree with Ms. Meyer. I think having that little extra insurance policy on time is a good thing, and it's just a healthy decision for us.
See, I remember how to do it. I agree with Ms. Meyer and Ms. Kane and the recommendation brought to us by our district. I know it's very well thought out, and I appreciate the comments too about keeping the school day as originally intended, but I think changing that now and having that plan in place now will allow everybody to go ahead and just know what the day is going to be, know what the rest of the year is going to be. It's already been disruptive enough. We already have our schedule. Graduations are still to be determined, so I personally think that it's better to just go ahead and put the plan in place as recommended by superintendent staff based on all of the work that everybody put in up to this moment. So, and I appreciate all the discussion leading up to this and thought, but as a parent, I don't have kids in school anymore, but I know you do. But I would rather just know now, be like, oh man, but oh well, it's done, and then it's done. That's just my thought.
Originally, when we decided to go to letting people out 2 hours early, it was at the request of our bus drivers, so that they could get things taken care of on the buses, get everything worked out that way. At the workshop, I asked if the bus drivers or people in transportation were aware of this and were they okay with it. And nobody's thrilled to death about it, but they were okay with it, and they said it would work out just fine. So I support leaving the 2 hours in there as Ms. Myers said, an insurance policy, but I think it's important that we make sure that it's there, just in case. And it's not a punishment to have to go 2 hours or to go the whole day. So I don't see it as a negative consequence. So I will support the original proposal that was brought forward.
Mrs. Edmond?
Thank you, Mrs. Cook, for your comments. I was going to mention the bus drivers and the rationale for the 2 hours previously. I think it's also important to clarify that Superintendent Hendricks said it could work either way. And I do appreciate the work that has gone into making this proposal, so I will support it.
Good, okay. So we'll keep it as is, and we'll just go ahead. When was that? When did they change the 2 hours early for the bus drivers? How long ago was that?
How long ago? Maybe 10 years ago?
At least.
Yeah, there's
at
been
least.
different iterations and some other things to consider. We used to have more days at the end of the school year for teachers to clean up than we used to. There were also a couple of years with hurricanes where we did extend those because we used to have a requirement for what was called the L300 schools for reading. And they had to have a certain number of minutes reading every day, and that actually used to be our biggest challenge, was to capture the minutes in the elementary schedule, not the high school schedule, because they had to have so much reading. So it's varied. A couple of years I remember we didn't do it, and then there was a year it wasn't on the calendar, remember that? And then we came back to the board and asked them to do it. So it's been varied in different ways, but I do agree with Mrs. Cook. It's not a punishment. We're not saying you can't enjoy the last day and have a field day and a picnic and all those things. You just get to do more fun now in those couple hours.
Yeah, for sure. I guess since my oldest is an 8th grader, it's all I've known. So it is the culture, it is the celebratory end of the year. So, okay, so we'll leave it as is. And any other discussion?
You need to vote on it.
Yes, ma'am. Any other discussion before we take a vote? Okay, good. So all those in favor of approving item 6.1, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, passes 7-0. Item 6.2, request approval to waive portions within policy 5420.02, reporting student progress, middle school, and 5420.03, reporting student progress and class ranking high school for first semester 2024-25 school year. Motion from Mrs. Cook and a second from Mrs. Kane. Mr. Hendrick, would you please introduce?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I mentioned before, the first vote was about the calendar only. This is about the waiving of exams, that policy, and then creating the grading policy if the board approves the waiving of those exams. And so to explain that, as she did at the workshop, Chief Academic Officer, Mrs. Danica Jones. Ms. Jones?
Great afternoon, Madam Chair, school board members, Mr. Hendrick, and staff. I am here today to bring forth consideration of item 6.2, approval to waive portions of policy 5420.02 and 5420.03, reporting student progress, middle and high school. This request would allow 4 additional days of instruction, or 4 more days, might I say, of instruction rather than 4 days of assessment. If approved, final semester grades will simply be determined by averaging the unweighted grades of the 2 quarters, quarter 1 plus quarter 2 divided by 2. We are working, as we continue to discuss this, the finalizing of graduation schedules during the last week of school, tentatively Thursday through Sunday. All of this is for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Board members, any discussion? Mrs. Edmond?
Just a question. Did you mention the last week of school, Thursday through Sunday?
Those are tentative dates.
So graduation would come after the last day of school?
Possibly, but those are tentative dates.
Understood.
The last week of school.
Thank you.
Any other discussion?
I just have a question. What, is it FAFSA, right?
Fast.
Fast, okay. Will that happen before the holidays, or can we start the semester with it? Where is that period of time?
So FAFSA, you mean before the December holiday?
Or can it wait till January?
So the period opens early, but you have the window from late December, usually January on.
Any other discussion? Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve item 6.2. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes 7-0. New business, items introduced by the superintendent.
I have no report today, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Items introduced by the school board attorney.
It may surprise you to hear that I don't have a report either.
Thank you, Mr. Kapersky. Items introduced by the board. And I don't see it on here, but Mrs. Woodford, I'm going to ask. Anyway, did you hear any requests?
No requests noted.
Okay. Okay, with that and seeing no other business, we'll adjourn this meeting. Thank you.